The palace was still as the first light of dawn crept through the tall windows. Inside the stone walls of the prison, the alien queen sat quietly on a cold stone bench, her hands shackled in front of her. Her sharp features, once proud and regal, now looked weary. Her skin, a deep shade of purple, had once shimmered with authority, but now it was dull, as though the life had drained from her. She was no longer the ruler of the galaxy. She had been betrayed by her closest advisors, and now she awaited her death. The queen had once ruled with an iron fist. She had built her empire through war and fear, crushing anyone who dared to oppose her. The galaxy had trembled under her rule. But things had changed. There were whispers of rebellion. Her own people, the ones she had fought so hard to protect, had turned against her. Her advisors had plotted behind her back, and now the time had come for her execution. As she sat in the darkness of the prison, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. The guards were coming. She knew what they were here to do. She had been prepared for this moment for weeks. She had thought of many ways to escape, but every plan had failed. Now there was nothing left but to face her end. Outside the cell, 2 guards stood watch, their heavy boots clicking on the cold stone floor. They had orders to make sure the queen would not escape. The queen's execution had been scheduled for dawn, and the guards were to ensure she did not survive the night. But the queen had always been a fighter. She had ruled for years because of her strength and cunning. Even now, with death so close, her mind raced. There was still time. Perhaps if she could convince the guards to release her, she could escape. The thought was fleeting, as she knew it was impossible. The palace was surrounded. The rebels were closing in. She was trapped. The queen closed her eyes and let out a long sigh. She had been strong. She had fought for her people, and now they would see her fall. As she sat in silence, she thought back to the day she had first risen to power. She had not started as a queen. She had been an outcast, a warrior from a distant planet, fighting to survive. But her ambition had been unmatched. She had fought for a chance at power, and she had taken it. It had been the only way to bring peace to her people. Even if that peace had come at the cost of war, now it seemed like all of that had been for nothing. The galaxy had grown tired of her. They no longer saw her as a ruler. They saw her as a threat, and perhaps she had become one. But the thought of dying without seeing her people safe, without securing her legacy, was unbearable. In the darkness of the cell, the queen's mind turned to the human who had crossed paths with her years ago. His name was Marcus, a soldier from a distant world. He had fought on the front lines of the war, and he had seen the chaos the queen's rule had caused. At first, they had been enemies, fighting for different causes. But something had changed between them. There had been moments when their goals aligned, when they had worked together to defeat a common enemy. Over time, the queen had come to respect Marcus. He was unlike any other human she had encountered. He had a sense of honor, something the queen herself had struggled to understand. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door creaking open. The guards were here. A tall alien figure stepped into the cell. He was dressed in the royal guard's uniform, a symbol of the queen's former strength. His face was stern, and his eyes held no emotion. He looked down at the queen with disdain. "It is time," he said coldly. The queen stood up slowly, her movements stiff. She had not been allowed to move freely for days, and her body ached from the confinement. She straightened her posture, meeting the guard's eyes with defiance. "You think this will end me?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of anger beneath it. "You think you can take me down without a fight?" The guard didn't answer. He reached for her chains, the heavy metal making a loud sound as it scraped against the stone. The queen pulled her arms back, but there was no use. The chains were too strong. The guard roughly pulled her from the cell and pushed her toward the waiting transport. There was no resistance. The queen knew this was the end. She had failed. Outside the prison, the air was cool, and the sun had just begun to rise. The streets of the palace were filled with people, all gathered to witness the queen's final moments. The rebels, the ones who had betrayed her, stood in the crowd, their eyes fixed on the queen. She could feel their gaze, their hatred, and their fear. They had wanted her gone for years, and now they were going to get what they wanted. As the queen was led to the execution chamber, she saw the people she had once ruled. They were no longer the loyal subjects she had once known. They had turned on her, their faces filled with anger and fear. But she also saw something else's fear of the unknown. The queen had ruled with strength, but now, as she walked toward her death, she realized how fragile everything was. One by one, her enemies would fall, and a new order would rise. But that was a thought for another time. The queen took a deep breath as she was positioned in front of the execution platform. The cold metal of the chamber's floor pressed against her feet. Her heart beat faster as the executioner stepped forward. The crowd fell silent. She had done what she could. The end was near, but deep within her, something stirred. A faint memory of a human soldier who had once saved her life. Marcus. Would he come for her now? Would he risk his life to save hers? She didn't know. Marcus stood quietly in the shadows, his eyes scanning the darkened streets of the palace. He could hear the distant sounds of the guards patrolling, the soft echoes of their boots on the stone roads. His heart beat faster with each passing moment. The queen's execution was set for dawn, but he couldn't afford to waste any time. The plan was in motion now. There was no turning back. Marcus wasn't like the others. He had always fought for something greater, for a cause that was worth dying. 4. When he had first crossed paths with the queen, he had been a soldier on the battlefield, just like any other. He had followed orders, fought with honor, and respected his enemies. But after the wars ended, something had changed. The queen's methods had been harsh, yes. But she had brought a kind of order that the galaxy had desperately needed. The galaxy was a chaotic place, torn by constant war and division. There had been times when Marcus had disagreed with the queen's tactics. But there had been other times when he had seen her vision, her understanding of what needed to be done to keep everything from falling apart. And so, he had come to respect her, even if that respect was buried beneath layers of anger and conflict. Now, the queen on the verge of death, Marcus was here to change everything. He had to rescue her. Not because he owed her, but because he believed that without her, the galaxy would be lost again. The power vacuum left by her death would only invite chaos. He couldn't let that happen. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device. It was a communication tool, one that had taken him days to acquire. The signal would allow him to contact his team inside the palace. His plan had taken weeks to prepare. He had spent months studying the palace's defenses, learning the guard rotations, and finding the weak spots. But now, the final pieces were falling into place. Marcus came a voice over the device, calm but tense. It was Jake, one of his trusted allies. We're in position. The path to the queen's cell is clear. We're ready when you are. Marcus took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the device. His plan was simple but risky. He and his team would infiltrate the palace's outer walls, moving quickly through the palace grounds to avoid detection. The palace guards were no fools, and there were eyes everywhere. But with Jake and the others helping, he had a chance. We'll be moving in 30 minutes, Marcus replied. Stay sharp. If we get caught, we won't have a second chance. The line went silent for a moment before Jake spoke again. Understood. Just make sure we're not too late. Marcus nodded, even though no one could see him. The time for hesitation was over. He couldn't afford to think about what would happen if they failed. If they didn't act now, the queen would die, and the galaxy would be left in the hands of those who would tear it apart. As he moved through the shadows of the palace grounds, his mind raced. His memories of the queen were still fresh. He remembered the first time they had fought side by side, battling an enemy that neither of them could have defeated alone. It had been a strange alliance, one built on necessity rather than trust. But over time, something had changed. The queen had become more than just a ruler. She had become someone Marcus could respect, someone who had seen the bigger picture, even when the cost was high. He reached a small, hidden door at the side of the palace, a narrow passageway that led deeper into the heart of the building. Was there that the queen was being held? The plan was simple. Get in, rescue her, and get out before the guards could stop them. But the palace was never as simple as it seemed. Even now, as Marcus pushed open the door and crept inside, he could feel the weight of the palace pressing down on him. The walls seemed to close in around him, and every step he took was a reminder of the danger they were in. "Move quickly," Marcus whispered to his team. "We have one shot at this." The group moved silently through the corridors, staying close to the walls and out of sight of the guards. Each member of the team was trained for this kind of mission, but the stakes had never been higher. They had to be fast. They had to be smart. Marcus's thoughts kept returning to the queen. He didn't know what she was thinking, locked away in the dungeon, but he knew one thing. She had always been a survivor. She had built her empire from nothing, climbing to the top of a broken world. She had made enemies along the way, and now those enemies were closing in for the kill. But Marcus knew the truth. She was more than just a ruler. She was someone who had fought for something bigger than herself, and that's why he had to save her. He turned a corner, made motion for the team to stop. The hallway ahead was lined with guards, their weapons raised, their eyes scanning the shadows. It was going to be close, but Marcus had been prepared for this. With a quick signal, his team spread out, positioning themselves along the walls, ready to strike. They were going to have to move quickly, take the guards out without raising alarm. One mistake, the whole plan would fall apart. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he crept closer to the first guard. He had done this countless times before, but this time felt different. The stakes were higher. The queen's life was on the line, and Marcus wouldn't fail her. Not now. With a swift, precise movement, he took down the first guard. The rest of the team followed, working in perfect harmony. They were silent, their movements quick and efficient. One by one, the guards fell, never knowing what hit them. Within minutes, the way was clear. Marcus nodded to his team, and they moved forward, making their way toward the queen's cell. As they approached the dungeon, Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions. There was fear, yes, fear of failure, fear of the unknown. But there was also something else, something stronger. Hope. They were close now. The queen was just a few steps away. Marcus knew that if they could reach her in time, everything could change. The minutes dragged on like hours. As Marcus and his team crept through the palace halls, the air was thick with tension. They had made it past the outer guards, but they knew the hardest part of the mission was still ahead. The queen's cell was deep inside the palace, far from the reach of anyone who could help her, and as the time ticked closer to dawn, the danger of being caught increased with every step. Marcus could feel the weight of his own fear pressing against him, but he pushed it aside. There was no time to be afraid. There was only the mission. Get to the queen. Get her out of here. Get out before the whole palace went into lockdown. The group moved quickly but carefully. They knew the layout of the palace like the back of their hands. Every hallway, every door, every turn had been memorized. But even with all the preparation, the sense of danger never left. They had to stay silent. One wrong move, one sound too loud, and it would all be over. As they approached the dungeon area, Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. This was where the queen had been locked away, isolated and abandoned by her own people. He couldn't imagine the thoughts running through her mind as she awaited her death. It didn't matter that she had been a ruler. She was still a person. She still had feelings, regrets, and fears. And Marcus couldn't let her die alone. He motioned for his team to stop as they reached a narrow hallway. 2 guards were stationed ahead, standing watch in front of the dungeon's entrance. They were talking softly, unaware of the danger closing in on them. Marcus looked to his team, his eyes meeting each of theirs. There would be no turning back. Marcus moved first, his footsteps light and deliberate. He knew that if they were going to survive, they had to act quickly. As he reached the corner, he pulled out a small, silent dart gun and fired it at the first guard. The dart hit its mark, and the guard fell instantly, unconscious before he even had a chance to react. The second guard didn't even see it coming. One of Marcus's team members moved in quickly. knocking him out with a precise blow to the back of his head. The guards were down. The way was clear. Marcus gave a silent signal to his team, and they moved swiftly toward the queen's cell. Each of them kept their eyes on the shadows, alert for any sign of movement or danger. But the palace was eerily quiet, as though it too was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. At the end of the hall, the queen's cell door stood like a silent sentinel. The thick, reinforced metal door looked impenetrable, but Marcus knew the security codes. He had stolen them from a guard's personal datapad days before, knowing it would be crucial to getting the queen out in time. He inserted the code into the small terminal beside the door, and with a soft click, the door unlocked. The door creaked open slowly, the hinges groaning under the strain. Inside, the queen sat on a bench, her hands still shackled. She looked up as the door opened, her eyes meeting Marcus's. For a moment, there was silence. Then the queen's voice broke through the quiet. "You're here," she said softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. She stood slowly, her chains clinking softly. "I didn't think anyone would come." Marcus stepped forward, his eyes focused on her. "I said I would," he replied, his voice steady but urgent. "We don't have much time. We have to move." Now the queen nodded, her eyes showing a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something he couldn't quite place. She had always been a powerful ruler, unshaken in the face of enemies and war. But now, in this moment, she seemed more vulnerable, more human than Marcus had ever seen her. The queen's eyes flicked toward the door, and she hesitated for a second. "You should have let me die," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Would have been easier." "No," Marcus said, shaking his head. "We're worth saving. The galaxy needs you." She met his eyes then, something flickering in her gaze. She didn't argue, she simply nodded. Marcus pulled the chains off her wrists, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the queen was free. But the freedom didn't last long. They had to move quickly. As soon as the door opened, the alarm would sound. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. The queen stood tall, her expression hardening once again. She had been a ruler for so long, and even in her captivity, her royal poise had not faltered. She might have been a prisoner, but she was still the queen. And she was not going to let this palace, or anyone in it, dictate her fate. "Lead the way," she said, her voice carrying the strength it had once held. "Let's get out of here." Marcus nodded and motioned for his team to follow him. The queen was in front now, moving quickly but with purpose, her every step filled with authority. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the halls as they made their way toward the palace's exit, but as they moved deeper into the palace, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air felt heavy, like something was waiting just around the corner. His instincts told him that they weren't alone. He signaled for his team to stop, his senses on high alert. Suddenly a voice rang out from behind them. "Stop." Marcus turned sharply, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. In the dim light, he saw several more guards appear, their weapons drawn. They'd been waiting, ready to stop the queen's escape. The queen's face went cold as she faced her former guards. "You're too late," she said, her voice hard and cold. "This ends now." Without another word, she stepped forward, her eyes locked on the guards. Marcus's team moved in quickly, taking out the guards with swift precision. There was no hesitation now. The queen's fate was in their hands, and they weren't going to let anyone stand in their way. As the last guard fell to the ground, Marcus felt a rush of relief, but it was short-lived. They still had to get out. The clock was ticking. They couldn't let the palace fall down around them. "Let's go," Marcus urged, his voice sharp with urgency. The queen nodded. It was time. It's time to leave the past behind and step into the unknown. The air inside the palace was thick with tension as Marcus, the queen, and their small team moved swiftly through the dimly lit hallways. Every step they took echoed off the cold stone walls, each sound a reminder of how close they were to the edge. Time was running out. The queen's execution was drawing nearer with every passing minute, and Marcus knew they had little chance of escaping without being noticed. They reached the main chamber. a vast room that had once been a place of grandeur, filled with guards and dignitaries. Now it was empty, save for the queen's former advisors and a few of her most loyal soldiers who had remained. Their faces were hardened, as if they had accepted what was about to happen. They knew the queen was no longer in charge. Her power had slipped away, and her empire was crumbling. A tall alien figure stood at the front of the chamber, dressed in dark ceremonial robes. He was the commander of the palace guards, the one who had orchestrated the queen's fall from. Grace's cold eyes locked with Marcus's as the two men sized each other up. "You think you can save her?" The commander's voice was low, mocking. "You're too late, human. The queen's time has come. There's no escaping this." Marcus didn't flinch. He had heard these kinds of threats before, was used to danger, but this was different. Queen was more than just a ruler to him now. She was someone worth fighting for, and he would not back down. "I'm not here to talk," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "I'm here to make sure she doesn't die today." Commander sneered, his sharp teeth glistening in the low light. "You have no idea what you're up against, do you? She betrayed us all. She's the reason for all the pain, all the suffering. She deserves to die." The queen stood tall beside Marcus, her expression unreadable. She had been a conqueror, a ruler who had used fear to control her empire. But now, standing next to Marcus, she felt something different. She felt a strange sense of hope. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to die. "I did what I had to do too. Protect my people," the queen said, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "But I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt anyone." The commander's face twisted with anger. "You speak of protection, but all you did was destroy. You used us as pawns in your game, and now you will pay the price for it." Before Marcus could respond, the queen stepped forward, her eyes locked on the commander. She wasn't the same woman who had ruled with fear and force. In this moment, she was something else, a survivor, someone who had seen the consequences of her actions and was ready to face them. "I don't need your forgiveness," the queen said. "I need you to understand. The galaxy doesn't need more war. It needs peace, and I am the only one who can bring it." The commander laughed bitterly. "Peace? You can't even save yourself. You're nothing now, just a queen without a Y." Crown Marcus could see the anger in the queen's eyes, but there was something else. Too, a deep sadness, a regret for the choices she had made. She had led her people into countless battles, won wars, and destroyed those who dared to challenge her. But in the end, it was all for nothing. Her empire was falling apart, and the galaxy was still divided. "I never wanted to be a ruler," the queen admitted softly. "I just wanted to protect my people. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what really mattered." Marcus stepped forward, his hand on the queen's shoulder. Wasn't sure if she was speaking to him or to herself, but it didn't matter. The past was the past, and now they had to focus on the present. "We don't have time for this," Marcus said, his voice urgent. "We need to leave now, before more guards show up." But the commander was already making his move. With a swift motion, he drew his weapon, a sleek black energy blade, and advanced on Marcus and the queen. The palace guards behind him followed, suit, weapons raised and ready. Marcus was quick, though. Pulled out his own weapon, a small, compact gun designed for close combat. With precision, he took down two of the guards before they even had a chance to react. The queen, too, was not afraid. She grabbed a nearby sword and wielded it with surprising skill, gutting down another guard who tried to strike her. The battle was chaotic. The chamber erupted in noise as the two sides clashed. Blades clanged, weapons fired, and the air was thick with the sound of combat. Marcus moved with efficiency, taking out one guard after another, his eyes never leaving the queen. She fought beside him, her movements fluid and fast, her anger and regret turning into raw power. The commander advanced toward them, his energy blade crackling with deadly power. "You can't win," he growled, his voice filled with rage. "You're just one human, and she's just a fallen queen. You're both nothing." But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was focused only on the task at hand, protecting the queen and getting her out of the palace alive. They couldn't waste any more time. If they didn't leave now, they would be trapped here forever. With a final well-aimed shot, Marcus took down the commander, his weapon piercing the alien's chest. The commander stumbled, falling to the ground with a loud thud. The remaining guards hesitated for a moment, their resolve shaken by the death of their leader. It was all the opening Marcus needed. "We need to go," Marcus said, turning to the Queen. "Now." She nodded, her face hardening as she took one last look at the palace. It was over. The empire she had built, the people she had once ruled, were all behind her now. She didn't know what the future held. But one thing was clear, the time for war was over, together. They rushed toward the exit, the weight of the past finally lifting from their shoulders. The Queen was free, and so was Marcus. Free from the chains of the past, and ready to face whatever came next. The sound of footsteps echoed through the empty corridors of the palace as Marcus and the Queen rushed down the hall. The Queen's heart was pounding in her chest, the weight of her past still heavy on her shoulders. She had been the ruler of an empire, but now she was just a fugitive, running for her life. Marcus led the way, his eyes scanning every corner of the hallway, always alert for any signs of danger. The Queen followed close behind, her every step echoing in the quiet of the palace. Her mind raced with thoughts of what had just happened. Her advisors, the people she had trusted, were dead. Her empire was crumbling, and now she was a prisoner of her own choices. But Marcus was here, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of hope. As they moved through the palace, Marcus kept a steady pace. The walls around them were cold, and the silence felt unnerving. They had been fortunate so far. But Marcus knew they couldn't keep their luck forever. The palace was vast, and they had only one exit to escape through. The main gates were heavily guarded, and there was no way they could get through without being seen. "Where are we going?" the Queen asked, her voice low, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "There's a secret tunnel on the east side of the palace," Marcus replied. "It's our best chance of getting out without being noticed. If we can make it there, we can get to the outer walls and escape." Queen nodded, but the fear in her eyes didn't fade. She had spent years building her empire, but now she was running from it. The galaxy had turned its back on her, and she didn't know what awaited her. On the other side of the walls, she had made enemies on every side, and the consequences of her rule were catching up to her as they reached a corner. Marcus held up his hand, signaling for the Queen to stop. He peered around the corner, his sharp eyes scanning the hallway. There were 2 guards standing at the end of the corridor, their weapons drawn, blocking their path. Marcus motioned for the Queen to stay low, his mind racing for a solution. "They're blocking the way," the Queen whispered, her hand tightening around the hilt of the sword she had taken earlier. "We'll have to take them down quietly," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stay close to me." With a quick motion, Marcus pulled out a small, silenced dart gun from his belt and fired.
Held.
The dart hit the first guard in the neck, and he crumpled to the floor without a sound. The second guard turned, startled, but before he could react, Marcus lunged forward, knocking him unconscious with a swift punch. The Queen watched in silence. Impressed by Marcus's efficiency, she had seen many battles in her time, but this was different. This was no longer about war or power. This was about survival. Marcus motioned for the Queen to move forward. They continued down the hall, the silence now more oppressive than ever. As they turned a corner, they found themselves at the entrance to the secret tunnel. The door was hidden behind a tapestry, and Marcus pushed it open carefully, revealing a narrow passageway that led down into the darkness. "This is it," Marcus said. "We're almost there." The Queen stepped into the tunnel, her heart still racing. The walls were cold and the air was damp, but she didn't mind. It was a small comfort compared to the cold stone of the palace's throne room. She could feel the weight of her past pressing on her, but there was a part of her that couldn't help but feel a sense of freedom. For the first time in years, she was not bound by her crown, her title, or her empire. She was just a woman, running for her life. As they moved through the tunnel, Marcus's voice broke the silence. "You know, you didn't have to come with me," he said, his tone soft. "You could have stayed behind. I would have gotten you out, but you didn't have to fight. The queen glanced at him, her face unreadable. And leave you to fight. Alone, she replied. You didn't come for me just to leave me behind now. Marcus smiled, but it was a brief, strained smile. It's more than that, isn't it? You don't just want to survive. You want to change things. The queen's eyes darkened as she thought of the galaxy she had ruled. She had been so focused on power, on keeping control, that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. Now, standing in the dark tunnel with a human soldier who had risked everything to save her, she realized how much she had been wrong. I've spent my life building an empire, she said softly. But I've never stopped to think about what my people really needed. I thought that power would give me control, but all it's done is tear everything apart. Marcus said nothing, but the understanding in his eyes was enough. They both knew the weight of responsibility. The galaxy had been torn apart by wars, by lies, by betrayal. But now, it was up to them to decide what came next. The tunnel opened up ahead, and Marcus motioned for the queen to follow him. Almost at the outer walls now. The sounds of the palace faded away, replaced by the rush of wind and the sound of distant footsteps. They were so close to freedom, but Marcus knew that they couldn't relax yet. The palace would soon realize the queen was missing, and the hunt would be on. They emerged from the tunnel into a small courtyard, hidden from the rest of the palace. The walls surrounding them were tall and thick, and the sky above was clear. It was the first time since the night had begun that the queen felt like she could breathe again. Marcus turned to her. We'll be safe for now, but we need to move quickly. Palace will be looking for us. The queen nodded, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. She had been ready to face her death, but now, with Marcus by her side, she had a chance to rebuild, to create something different, something better. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, she was ready to face whatever came next. They moved quickly through the courtyard. The weight of the past lifting with every step, they didn't look back. The future was uncertain, but the queen knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. The night air was cool against the queen's skin as she and Marcus moved swiftly through the narrow streets outside the palace. The familiar sound of the palace guards and the bustling life of the city seemed far behind them now. With each step, the queen felt the weight of her past slipping away, replaced by the uncertain, yet strangely liberating feeling of freedom. They had made it. They were out of the palace. But that was only the beginning. Marcus led the way, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, making sure they weren't being followed. The streets were empty, save for the occasional passerby, who quickly moved aside when they saw the determined look on Marcus's face. The queen, walking just a step behind, kept her head low, her mind racing with thoughts of what would come next. She had always believed that her reign was unbreakable. She had built an empire that spanned galaxies, conquered planets, and defeated enemies with ease. But now she saw the truth. The empire she had fought so hard to create was fragile. Her people had turned against her, and her own advisors had betrayed her. Her life had been one of control, but it had led her to this moment, then the run, with no clear future. What now? Queen asked quietly, her voice almost lost in the night. Marcus paused, turning to face her. His expression was serious, but there was a hint of something else in his eyes. Something softer, something that spoke of understanding. We need to get you to safety, Marcus said. There's a place where you'll be safe, where no one can find us. But we have to move quickly. The queen nodded, though a part of her hesitated. She had spent years building her empire, ruling with an iron fist, and now she was reduced to this, a fugitive. It was hard to accept that everything she'd worked for was gone, but deep down, she knew she had no choice. The galaxy had changed, and she had to change with it as they continued through the dark streets. The queen couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. Her senses, honed by years of ruling, were on high alert. The queen knew that their escape wouldn't go unnoticed for long. The palace would soon realize she was gone and the hunt would begin. She glanced at Marcus. He was focused on the path ahead, his mind working through every possible scenario. He had been by her side during the escape, but now the future seemed uncertain. What would happen once they reached safety? What kind of world would she be living in now? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of distant footsteps, Marcus's. Head snapped around, his eyes scanning the area. The queen tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at her side. "Stay close," Marcus whispered. They ducked into a nearby alleyway, the shadows swallowing them whole. The footsteps grew louder, but then, just as suddenly, they stopped. The quiet of the night returned, but the tension remained. Marcus didn't speak. He simply motioned for the queen to stay where she was, while he crept to the edge of the alley. His eyes narrowed as he peered around the corner. A group of palace guards was passing by, their faces stern, their eyes scanning every corner of the street. They were searching for them. Marcus waited until the guards had passed, then signaled for the queen to follow him. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, making their way deeper into the city. "We can't stay in the city," Marcus said, his voice low. "We need to get out of here. There's a transport waiting for us outside the city. Once we're there, we can figure out what to do next." The queen nodded, but deep down, she knew that escaping the city was only the first step. They couldn't hide forever. The palace would eventually catch up with them, and when they did, there would be no more chances. As they neared the edge of the city, the queen felt the weight of her past bearing down on her once more. She had been a ruler, a conqueror, but now all of that was gone. She had no empire, no throne. She was just one woman, running for her life. For the first time, she questioned everything she had ever believed in. "Marcus," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "What happens when we get to this safe place? What's next for me? For us?" Marcus stopped and turned to face her. His expression was kind, but there was a certain sadness in his eyes. He said quietly, "But I do know one thing. You're not alone anymore. Neither am I." The queen looked at him, her heart heavy. She had never allowed herself to rely on anyone. She had been the ruler, the one in control. But now, for the first time, she realized that maybe she had been wrong. Maybe she had been too focused on power, too focused on control. The galaxy didn't need more rulers. It needed people who could listen, who could change. She didn't know if she could ever redeem herself. But maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to try. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "For everything," Marcus smiled, though it was a small, tired smile. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together." The queen nodded, the weight in her chest lightening just a little. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her that there was still hope. There was still a chance for something new. For the first time, she felt like she could begin again, as they made their way toward the transport. The first light of dawn began to appear on the horizon. The darkness of the night was slowly being replaced by the pale light of a new day. The queen had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain: she had a chance to start over. And this time, she wasn't going to do it alone.